How many babies did you have after Aquila?
She was my 4th birth, and I've had 5 more. So I've had 9 births total.
And how did you have them?
All in the hospital, of course.
Well, yes. Did you have any C-sections?
I've had no C-sections. I've had one other abruption, however. I had a partial abruption in labor with 3 babies ago with Judah. I was just laying there in the bed, having contractions, and I said, my water broke. I had like a blanket over my lap, and the nurse lifts up the blanket, and her face goes, she goes, that's not your water. And then there were 14 people in the room all of a sudden. And it was blood. I felt like my water had just broken. It was all blood. And there was all these people in there. And they're pushing consent forms because I hadn't had an epidural or anything. And they're like giving me a consent to go under general. But the baby was on the monitor the whole time. They're like, his heart rate has not even like dipped a tiny bit. And they're like, and the bleeding stopped. So they like checked me with an ultrasound. They said, okay, look, we have a partial abruption here, but his heart rate is great. You appear to have stopped bleeding. So basically, we're going to monitor you like crazy. And if anything goes sideways, they're like, we really want you to get an epidural because we really don't want to have to put you under for general. And I said, you know what? I would love an epidural because I really don't want to be asleep when my baby's born. So I had an epidural, and he ended up being born, and they lifted up the placenta and showed me. I took a picture. It was a 30% abruption. There was a clot covering 30% of the placenta.
It shows you how far luck goes, because
right?
It could have gone either way. Right. I mean, they could have whisked you off and put you under general for a C-section at any time.
Yep. So, they were ready. They were ready. All it showed me is they were ready, because I'm telling you, she lifted up between when she lifted up that sheet and to when there were like 14 people in the room was like 60 seconds. There was just, the room was flooded with people, and they were ready. They could have had me under and had him out. They told me in like 3 minutes or something like that. They said, I mean, they were quite ready. And we were talking, the anesthesiologist spent a long time in there because we were talking about different things. I said, well, what happens if it's not a super emergency? And he was like, well, we can do a spinal faster than an epidural. But he's like, but honestly, if it's like a real emergency, we're just going to put you under. That's why we had you sign the consent. But he's like, if I do an epidural now, then all I have to do is put more medicine in it if we're going to do a C-section. So that's your best bet to make sure that you can be awake if you do need a C-section. So, and they said also, we don't want you moving around too much because we don't want to chase, like if you're moving around in labor, they have to keep repositioning to make sure the heart rate's on there. They're like, because of you bleeding that much, we really don't want to lose his heart rate at all. So if you're having a epidural, you can be still, and you're not going to be like in pain in the bed trying to stay still. So I was like, no, you had me at, I see my baby be born, and I don't have to be knocked out for that, because I don't want to be,
So since you've had epidural births and non-epidural births, do you care anyway? Either way?
I've had funny because I've done all of them since then. My last birth, I was like, I haven't had a natural birth in a while, because the next birth after the placenta abruption, I said, I want an epidural from the beginning, because I don't want to have something scary. So I just, as soon as labor was on, we were like, epidural. But so then the next birth, I'm like, I haven't had a natural birth in a while. I started one with Judah, but then I ended up not giving birth. It was an epidural, and my current husband, I have never had like a full natural birth, and he had always wanted to have a natural birth, and his first wife, they didn't have a natural birth. He was an epidural, and so I'm like, we're gonna do this. We're gonna just try this, and because when you've had that many babies and you feel the urge to push, and a doctor checks you and says you're only 6 and leaves the room, even though I told her that's happened to me before, you don't want to do that, the baby's gonna come out. She did it anyways. She left, and I told the nurse, his head's in my hand. And she's like, no, stop. She's like, pull that off the wall. She points to my husband to pull the cord off the wall. And then she realizes, and the only time I've ever, for a natural birth, been able to stop, they always say, oh, stop after the head comes out, and then stop, now push. Never been able to stop. This time she said, stop. And I was able to stop, which I was amazed, because I was just able to. And then the cord was around his neck. She pulled it out from around his neck, and then she said, okay, now you can push. And then I pushed him out, and she said that was the first time she's ever delivered a baby. She was like, oh, I can't believe I just delivered a baby. I can't believe I just delivered a baby, because she had never delivered a baby. And she's like, you really did need to push. And I was like, I told you I needed to push when she came in here and said I was 6. I said I was feeling pushy. I said not to leave. And so after that, that was my last experience. I'm like, I don't want to do that again, because it's so like dramatic, and like I would rather, it was so like Novena's birth with the epidural from the start, it was so calm, and it's like I was watching shows, and then I was like, oh, I think I feel something, and they're like, oh, look, you're complete, and they have time to get everything ready, and then it's like this push out. It's like when you have a dream of giving birth and it doesn't hurt. That's what it's like with the epidural. It's like they just, whoop, there's the baby, okay, all done, and it's like, so I think I'm just gonna stick with epidurals. I've tried the whole natural thing enough times that I know I can do it, and it's really not that much. It's not what's cracked up to be. It's kind of painful and dramatic and
Uncontrolled.
Uncontrolled. Yes, that's the difference. Is the control with the epidural is like, if a multipara says she needs to push and she hasn't had an epidural, there is no waiting. With an epidural, I said I feel like I might need to push, and I can sit there and wait. And I can actively push when they say push, but I'm not pushing without it. Whereas when I can feel everything, I cannot stop. They're like, do not push. I'm like, do not push. It's like, do not breathe. It's not going to happen. So I think for everybody's sake, it's probably less stress to do an epidural if we have any more babies.
Can I ask how your pregnancy was after you had her? So after you lost her and then you got pregnant again, how was that?
Well, I mean, there's 2 factors to that. There's first thing that I don't think a lot of people realize is that, my losing Aquila, the fallout from my midwife's incompetence did not just end there. Like it spread into my next pregnancy, because I had the infection during labor that was never addressed. When I showed up to the hospital hemorrhaging, having had an eruption, all they treated was the hemorrhage, and they figured you had an eruption. By then I didn't have a fever anymore because my body had expelled, most of it. And they were like, nobody said anything about fever. I didn't, I was out of it. My midwife didn't come. No records came. They didn't know about the fever. So they didn't give me any antibiotics. So my next pregnancy, I got pregnant, right after 6 weeks. So like, I think 8 weeks after she was born, like I was pregnant again with Willow. And when I was 30 weeks along with that pregnancy, first up, the other aspect is like emotionally, it was hell. Like I was grieving, and it was so stressful because I was quite sure that she was just gonna die all the time, like there was no way I was gonna get to have a living baby out of this. And I also was, just still grieving Aquila, even though I was pregnant. It was like, didn't replace her. It's still like, wanted my other baby. And it was like, at 30 weeks, I got really sick. I got a virus, that landed me in the hospital. I was very sick. Apparently there was a virus going around because infectious disease came and said he had seen 3 other pregnant women across the city with the same. It was weird. It was a virus. They didn't have a name for it because they tested for like everything under the sun. It was just some random virus, but it was making the women have like neon orange pee, which was the weirdest thing, and a fever and contractions and all that. But these other women had the same thing. And he's like, there's some random virus. But, once they got the fever under control, the contractions stopped, and I was in the hospital a couple days. They let me go home, and I never fully recovered. Like I was just down. I was so tired and out of it. Even after the fever was gone, I was home, and it was a week later, fever was spiked back up, started contracting again, ended up back in the hospital. And this time they were doing every test, and said, we don't know what's wrong with you. Why? What is going on? And finally they were like, put me in an MRI. Then they like decided to do an amnio. They were like, we're gonna do a tap. And that was so painful because they did not numb me first. They said, oh, it'll hurt less. Most people say that numbing hurts worse. No, it feels like a giant needle going in your stomach when they do it. So they did an amnio, and they tested positive for having a bacterial infection in my uterus. So I had a choreo infection, even though my water sac was completely intact. I had an infection, and so they had to induce me at 31 weeks, and she was born a preemie, and then she had 7 days of antibiotics by IV, and I had 3 days of antibiotics by IV. And the reason that my OB gave me 3 days of antibiotics by IV is because she said, and normally with a choreo infection, they would have just given like a day, like 24 hours. But she said what she thought, what her theory of what happened, and she was like the top OB at that hospital. She's been there forever. And she was like, you never got treated when you had choreo the last time. And that pregnancy, I had tested positive, group B strep positive in my urine at 6 weeks pregnant. So they had given me amoxicillin, and they said, well, you'll just get antibiotics in labor. She said, you were completely colonized with bacteria from your choreo, and your body held it in check. Like, so you have the bacteria, but your body keeps you from getting sick. But then you get a virus, a really hard virus that knocks out your immune system, and that allows that bacteria to start multiplying in the chorion, and it completely infected it. Even though there was no break, it was already, the bacteria was already there. Your immune system was just keeping it in check for the last 30 weeks. And then when your immune system dipped, it couldn't, and so you got infected. So I had a preemie in the hospital, in the NICU for 5 weeks because of, you know, not getting proper care the first time, which sucked.
How was the hospital for you while you had a preemie in there at NICU? Because NICU is kind of rough on people.
Yeah, NICU's traumatic because to me, I'm thinking, I just had the worst thing happen, the worst outcome. I just want this one to be normal. I just want to, I breastfed all my babies. I want to nurse her. I want to hold her. And like, I felt like it was constant. There were some NICU staff that were amazing, don't get me wrong, but a lot of it was like, they're like, you should go home and rest, mama. You should give her a bottle, mama. And I'm like, I just want to hold my baby all the time. I do not want to put her down. She should be in my belly right now. I want to nurse her because that is normal for me. I don't want to give her a bottle. I want to breastfeed her. I want to do, like, it was like dumb things. Like, I want to bathe her. I bought this, like, perfume-free, special organic baby stuff. Like, you can't use that. You have to use our stuff. And I'm like, excuse me? I'm her mother. Like, I'm like, there's nothing dangerous in this. This is better than your stuff. And I felt like I couldn't even make choices like what to bathe her with. Like, they were like so bad at letting parents just be the parents. I remember them berating this mama who didn't want to nurse her baby next to me, telling her, arguing with her until she's in tears about how she has to nurse her baby, how she's breastfeeding. She's like, I'm going back to work in 2 weeks, and there's no reason. I don't want to. I'm not going to. I would need her to take a bottle. And they're like berating her, and it's like they're berating her for not nursing, and they're berating me for not giving a bottle. It's like, you don't do it exactly their way. Like, they're gonna like. And it was traumatic. It was second only to, of course, losing a baby. I was so glad to have her alive, and she wouldn't have lived without NICU, but it's still absolutely traumatic, especially when your previous experiences of taking care of a baby are so vastly different than what it's like parenting in the NICU. Now I could take it in stride because I've got special needs kids. I've done NICU with them, but at that point in my parenting journey and that age and that experience, it was absolutely traumatic. I'm definitely in a different place now. I wish I could like walk alongside somebody. I wish there had been somebody to walk alongside me at that point and be like, hold my hand and be like, here's what to do, here's how to advocate for yourself, here's how to get through this. But it was just scary and isolating, and and I was grieving so hard that it was just like I just wanted to take her home and be normal. I just wanted to be back to what felt like normal parenting to me.
I hear that with some NICU parents, some of them don't. I don't know how much you understood. I'm sure they told you something in NICU, but there are parents who think that there's nothing wrong with their babies, that they can't fix themselves. It's like, no, actually your baby's in NICU for a reason. And You were struggling. I know. It's just that some people, I think, don't struggle and they just go straight with their instincts, which is kind of gratifying if you really are confident in yourself. But it's kind of like you have these people telling you no and that you can't, and it's hard.
Well, we had a lot of that, and I get where you're coming from, but for the first few weeks, absolutely, they saved her life. And I'm one of those parents, I still am to this day. I will ask a billion questions to try to understand what's going on. I do not just uninformed go into it. But like when she was on the CPAP, when she was getting surfactant in her, put in her lungs, when she was still getting IV antibiotics, there was plenty of times where she absolutely had to be there. But towards the end, the last 2 weeks, the last week and a half, I wanted to breastfeed. Remember, I didn't want to give a bottle. And they were like, we have to give a bottle. Breastfeeding's too hard. So we're doing like weighted feedings, like where, and we're trying like, they're trying where they'll put a tube, her NG tube, they'll pull some out to see if there's some in her belly. And they're trying all these different things. And they're like, well, she's just going to be, if you're not going to give a bottle, she's just going to be here for a long time. I'm like, how about this? I said, moms who have babies with Down syndrome, because I'm very involved in this, especially in community, they go home on NG tube. I said, I am an informed parent. I said, if my insurance will agree to pay for a nurse to come out every day and check her NG tube, can we go home? Because it was literally the only thing. The only thing was she wasn't waking up enough to feed because she was, a preemie, and that's what they do. They sleep, and it's hard to get them to eat enough. And they were like, well, see what the insurance will do. The insurance came in, they sent a representative. They were like, absolutely, it's costing $250,000. We'd much rather pay for a nurse to meet you at your house and check the NG tube if this baby doesn't need any other care. She's not having like heart stuff. She's not having any breathing problems. And so they said yes. And the doctor was very supportive. My neonatologist was like, absolutely, I want you to breastfeed. I think this is fine. I think you're capable of handling this. And we want to do this. And then she goes off for a week because it's her week off. And the next doctor who comes in is an ass. And he is so proud of himself and so full of himself. And he says, you're not going home on an NG tube. Who told you could do that? And I'm like, this is discharge day. And this has been the plan. We literally rounded about this yesterday. I have a nurse coming to my house tomorrow to check it every day. Like the plan is that we're going home on an NG tube. And he's like, no, over my dead body. He goes, if you even make another call to try to make this happen, I'll call CPS on you. He threatened me with CPS. And I was just lost it in tears. And so I called in the lactation consult and I said, get a bottle. I said, I am leaving this place now. I said, get a bottle. We're giving her a bottle. And so I gave her a bottle that day. 2 days later, she was able to leave on a bottle of my breast milk. And then I went home and then I rented a scale and I got an SNS and I worked with an SNS and I fed her and I did test weights every single time until I could get her fully on the breast away from the bottle. But it was absolutely the most frustrating and dehumanizing thing to be, because he's like, you're crazy. Absolutely. And I'm like, it's not crazy to go home like this. And it is not crazy because now I adopt children like this. And yes, they would send me home. It was because that particular doctor decided that wasn't acceptable because she didn't have Down syndrome. She doesn't have any conditions. So there's no reason she should stay here. Now, during COVID, they would absolutely send her home. They're sending home NICU babies as quickly as they can. If a parent says, I'll take them home on oxygen or I'll take them home on whatever, they'll send them home. So they could have sent her home. They refused to because they were like, we'll just keep her here and keep making money off her. Because it was like, and we didn't have Medicaid. We were paying a ton of money out of pocket for the deductibles on that NICU stay, for, a baby that just didn't want to wake up. And it's so funny because I've had babies pretty early at like 37 weeks and they were sleepy. And I know now how to supplement, how to do all that because of the NICU experience. Like I know what a premature baby, even if they're like just barely premature, like how feeding goes and how, what you need to do to make sure that they eat enough, and I wouldn't have known that without that experience of having to fight tooth and nail to get my baby breastfed.
I like that story. It's a horrible story, but I like it. I like your part in it. How's that?
Okay. I mean, it worked out. She nursed for 2 years, and it worked out. It was, and now I'm not so opposed to bottles. Then I was like, absolutely. I just broken out of this paradigm of home birth, and I was like, I can't give my baby a bottle. Like, I was just, that was like inconceivable to me. Like, I can't even. Now it's like, my son, he's breastfed. He's 10 months old, but he's had supplemental bottles. I can just pump, give him a bottle right now. That's why he hasn't been down here. He'll take a bottle just fine, and nurse just fine, and you can do both. I didn't realize you could actually do both, because everything says, if you ever give your baby a bottle, they're never going to nurse again. They're going to be confused, all this stuff. Apparently, that's not actually true. And you absolutely can give a bottle. As long as you keep your supply up and they keep nursing as well, they can go back and forth between bottle and breast just fine. I didn't know that then. So that's why I didn't want to. And that's not like they were even saying that to me. They were just like, they were flat out saying, the NICU lactation consultant said 90% of anyone coming out of here is not going to breastfeed longer than a month. They're going to go home and they're going to be all on bottles. She's like, I understand why you want to leave her on breast, because she's like, most of these babies will be bottle fed in a month. Like, she's like, no, she's like, rarely, it's hard to even get enough milk when you're premature, when your baby's premature, to have enough milk supply, but to also, stick with it long enough to get them breastfed only is very difficult. So,
I mean, I kind of get where she's coming from. She's like, don't kill yourself over it.
Right.
But on the other hand, what we say in the birth group is your experience is not anybody else's experience. So even if 90% of the kids leave NICU and don't breastfeed it barely at all, there's 10% that do. So, you could be that 10%.
Right.
It's blanket generalizations do not help.
No.
It should be, this is your situation, this is where you're at. We'll see where it goes from here.
I just wish I could talk to, that me back then and be like, okay, honey, let me tell you how this is actually gonna play out. Like, here's the truth. You can give her, as long as you're committed to breastfeeding and you've got a supply,
yep.
you can give her bottles, get her the hell out of this place, and go. You can wean off those bottles onto the breast, and it will be totally work. Like, because I was just terrified. I'm like, I'll get on the bottle and I'm just going to be exclusively pumping, because this is never going to work now, because she's going to not know how to breastfeed.
And the funny thing is as they get older, breastfeeding gets easier.
Yes.
It's when they're very young or premature when it's harder for them. So it's like, it's actually, you have a better chance of breastfeeding an older child than you do a younger one.